All right, so where we left off yesterday was the first 5 verses. Now, I know we didn't get very far. Hopefully, we'll pick up the pace a little bit. But if you remember where we left off, we had just met a man with an ironic name who had 2 sons with tragically ironic names who had all died in a foreign land, that they had abandoned God's land and gone over to this land that was essentially cursed by God, the land of the Moabites. Moabites are not considered good people for Israel, so they must have been pretty desperate. Well, in verse 6, we see a changing a little bit. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. All right, so here's the stage. We've got Naomi, and we've got these 2 beautiful women, Orpah and Ruth. And these widows have decided to remain with Naomi, which is interesting because at this point they actually had freedom to go back and return to their family. And yet, by first indications, we're seeing that they're going back to Israel. Now remember, these are Moabite women, so these are not women that should be regarded or feel welcome as they return to Israel. So this is a very interesting choice that these women are making. So, with her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she'd been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. And then, on the way, Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. And may the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Okay, so I get a couple of questions as I read just these first couple of verses here. So first of all, we need to recognize that Naomi sees that these girls have already gone above and beyond because they didn't abandon her as soon as the husbands died. So already we're getting a little bit of a taste of the character of these 2 women. Now, we're going to see Orpah leave here in a minute, but we're not going to fault her for that because already she's gone above and beyond, okay? But verse 9 is what gets me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Naomi is pronouncing a blessing on these 2 Moabites. Are we allowed to do that? Was she allowed to do that? And more importantly, would God honor that blessing? Think about it. These are the Moabites. These are people that shouldn't be receiving any kind of blessing. And yet here's an Israelite woman that is now blessing or praying blessing upon these 2 women. It's an interesting question to be had here. It kind of leads to another question. Does God change his mind? You know, that's an interesting question because if you look back in the Old Testament, I suppose that there are some instances where you could see that perhaps God changed his mind. It happened several times with Moses during the Exodus when the Israelites would stray and make bad choices, and God would then say to Moses, you know what, let's start over. I'm going to kill them all, and I'm just going to start with you. And then Moses would go, but God, if you did that, then people would start talking and say, well, why did he bring him out of Egypt just to destroy him and kill him? And it would almost seem like, if you read those scriptures, that Moses was convincing God to change his mind. And yet, if God is really sovereign, if God really is omnipotent and omniscient, and this all-powerful person that we claim that he is, would he really change his mind? Or perhaps God does things for the benefit of us. Maybe God was saying those things not because he was actually going to change his mind and destroy the Israelites. Maybe he did that to remind Moses. Maybe he did that so that Moses would remember what the mission is, so that Moses would not despair, and that Moses would not lose hope about the possibilities and the future promises, and that Moses would be reminded that those promises will come to fruition. It's a little bit of reverse psychology, if you will, like a parent to a child. So I say here we have an interesting moment. God is using this story. Remember, this is found in the Old Testament, so the people of Israel would be very familiar with this story. God is using a little bit of reverse psychology here. And he's telling us that nobody is beyond God's blessing. They can choose to have themselves removed from God's blessing, but no one is beyond God's power and beyond God's blessing. So when Naomi prays and says, may the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband, God, we know of for sure, will honor that blessing at least with one of them. We don't know what happens to Orpah, but we do know exactly what happens to Ruth as we're reading this story. So then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi says, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have more sons who could become your husbands?" Remember, tradition said that the right of the kinsman redeemer basically said that you had to pass it on. If you have a son that has a wife and the son dies, then the wife gets sent down to the next son so that the bloodline can continue for the oldest child. So there's a right of passing things on, of a kinsman redeemer, if you will, that we're going to start seeing, and we're already getting foreshadows of it. But even more special than that, we're going to get foreshadows of the ultimate kinsman redeemer. All right, we're out of time. We'll continue and find out who stayed and who went. Tune in next week.